It was a chilly Friday evening when she entered the dimly lit restaurant for yet another shift. The kind of evening when the world outside was buzzing, but inside everything seemed to slow down. The warm glow of hanging lights and the soft clink of cutlery on fine china set the scene for another night of serving food and drinks to the city's elite. She had grown used to the rhythm of the place, the smooth hum of conversation, the rustling of napkins, the occasional laughter, and the steady shuffle of waiters and waitresses moving between tables. She had been working here for a few years now. Each night was the same routine: take orders, serve the food, clear the plates, smile politely, and repeat. Most of the customers barely looked her in the eye. They were too busy with their own conversations, too caught up in their own worlds. She didn't mind. It wasn't as though she wanted their attention. She didn't have the time or energy to focus on much beyond the task at hand. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The tips were decent enough, and the schedule allowed her to have a little time for herself. But that wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself when she was younger. She had always dreamed of something more, something bigger. Music had been her passion since childhood. As a little girl, she used to spend hours playing the piano in the small living room of her family's modest apartment. She didn't have a grand piano or fancy lessons. Instead, she learned by ear, picking out tunes from the radio and the few classical music CDs her parents could afford. The piano was her escape. When life felt too hard, too heavy, playing was her way of finding peace. Yet the reality was different now. The music she loved had become a quiet background to the noise of her life. She had long stopped dreaming about a future where she was on a stage, performing to a packed audience. Dreams like that seemed too far out of reach, too unrealistic for someone like her. Someone who spent her days carrying trays and wiping down tables. Tonight, however, was different. There was an air of excitement that she couldn't quite shake. Maybe it was the way the restaurant was buzzing with anticipation. Tonight, they were expecting some important guests, wealthy, influential people from the city's upper crust. The staff was already running around preparing for the night, and the manager had briefed everyone about the importance of making a good impression. As she passed through the kitchen, she overheard the head chef speaking in a low voice to one of the other staff members. "The piano player's not showing up tonight. Apparently he's sick. We're going to have to figure something out." The news barely registered at first, but as she made her way to the front of the restaurant to start her shift, her manager caught sight of her and immediately came over with a look of mild panic on his face. "Hey, I need you to do me a favor tonight," he said, his voice tinged with stress. "The piano player called in sick and I'm in a bind. Can you just for tonight play a few tunes on the piano? You know, just to fill in. It'll be low-key, nothing too fancy." Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time someone had mentioned her piano skills. A few of her co-workers had seen her playing during breaks and had encouraged her to consider performing more. But the idea of playing for a room full of strangers, especially ones with so much money and influence, was terrifying. What if she messed up? What if she couldn't remember the right pieces? What if they laughed at her? I don't know, she stammered. "I haven't played in front of an audience in years. I know you can do it," he interrupted, his face softening as he saw the hesitation in her eyes. "Look, it's just for background music. Nobody will be paying that much attention. You'll be fine. Please, just help me out this once." She stood there for a moment, weighing the options. She could say no. She could tell him it wasn't her thing anymore and go on with her regular shift. But something about his plea, the desperation in his voice, made her pause. It was rare for the manager to ask for anything like this. Maybe it was just a chance to do something different, something out of the ordinary. Besides, she loved the piano. The thought of sitting at that grand piano, even if only for a little while, stirred something deep inside her. It was a chance to feel that spark again, the one she hadn't felt in so long. "Okay," she finally agreed, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll do it. But just a few songs, nothing too much." Her manager smiled gratefully, relieved. "Thanks, you're a lifesaver. I'll let the guests know." With a quick nod, he was off to manage the other aspects of the evening, leaving her standing there with a feeling of both excitement and dread swirling inside her. The piano was tucked away in the corner of the dining room, its polished surface reflecting the soft lighting above. As the evening went on, the noise of clinking glasses and gentle conversations grew louder. She found herself drawn to the instrument, though her nerves began to creep in. What was she doing? She hadn't played in front of a crowd in ages. What if she messed up? The pressure felt suffocating. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the piano. The familiar smell of polished wood and ivory keys made her feel a little less nervous. She sat down, her fingers gently brushing the keys, testing the sound. A few moments passed, and she allowed herself to settle into the rhythm of the piano, tuning out everything else around her. At first, she played softly, a simple melody that filled the air with a soft, calming ambiance. She noticed a few guests glance her way, but most were too absorbed in their own conversations. The music was just background noise, something pleasant but unimportant. As the night wore on, she felt more confident. The pieces she played were a mix of her favorites, gentle classical music and a few soothing jazz tunes. Slowly, she began to relax, her fingers moving more freely across the keys. The guests were beginning to take notice. The soft background music was no longer just noise. A few heads turned and whispers began to spread. The delicate melodies drifted through the air, adding a touch of elegance to the evening. But it wasn't until she played a song she hadn't planned to, an impromptu piece, a soulful melody that she had always loved, that the room fell completely silent. Her fingers seemed to have a life of their own, carrying the music with such depth that she forgot where she was for a moment. She didn't think about the wealthy patrons. She didn't worry about the fact that she wasn't a professional. It was just the music. When she finished, the room stayed still for a moment. The only sound was the soft clinking of silverware, but it was as if everyone had paused, as if the music had stopped time for just a few seconds. Then slowly applause broke out. It wasn't loud or overly dramatic, but it was there. She blinked in surprise. For a moment, she wasn't sure if it was real. She turned her head and saw the guests staring at her. Their faces were full of admiration, surprise, and something else, something that felt like recognition. Her heart raced as she forced a small, embarrassed smile. She hadn't expected this, and then she saw him. One of the men at a table near the front, a tall, well-dressed man in his mid-40s, stood up. His eyes were locked on her, a look of genuine appreciation in them. He began clapping, his hands loud and firm. It was as if his applause was different from the rest of the rooms. He was the first to speak. "That was incredible," he said, his voice clear and warm. "You should be on stage, not behind a piano in a restaurant." Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if it was the warmth of the compliment or the shock of being noticed at all. But in that moment, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to believe for a long time. Maybe she was capable of more than she thought. The applause felt like a blur. The soft clapping from the guests seemed distant, as though it was coming from another world. For a moment, she couldn't understand what had just happened. She had played the piano, yes, but it wasn't supposed to be a performance. It was just background music. That was all it was meant to be. But now, as the last of the applause died down, she sat there, hands still resting lightly on the keys, unsure of what to do next. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the room. The guests who had been talking before were now all staring at her. Some of them had their phones out capturing the moment, some with smiles, others with looks of surprise. It was as if they had just witnessed something unexpected, something rare. She felt her cheeks flush, a mix of embarrassment and exhilaration bubbling up inside her. She had never wanted to be the center of attention, never imagined that one simple song would change everything. The truth was, the spotlight felt both terrifying and strangely comforting at the same time. She had always preferred to blend in with the crowd, never drawing too much attention to herself. But tonight was different. A few seconds later, the tall man who had clapped the loudest approached her. His footsteps were steady, and she could hear them growing louder as he made his way across the floor. He was dressed in a dark suit, the kind that spoke of wealth and importance. His face was warm and friendly, yet there was something in his eyes that suggested a deeper curiosity, something more than just polite interest. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron, unsure of what to say. Should she thank him? Should she downplay it and tell him it was nothing? She felt caught between wanting to hide and wanting to acknowledge the unexpected recognition she'd just received. He stopped in front of her, his expression now one of genuine admiration. "That was incredible," he said again, his voice softer this time. "You've got real talent. Why haven't you been doing this professionally?" Her eyes widened. I'm just a waitress," she replied, feeling a lump form in her throat. "I don't really play in front of people much. It's just something I do in my spare time." He smiled, but there was a seriousness in his gaze. You should be on stage. You could be performing for a much bigger audience than this. She looked down at the keys, her fingers curling around them nervously. I don't think that's for me, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I've got bills to pay. This is just something I do for myself. He tilted his head as though he wasn't buying her excuse. I can tell you've got more than just a casual talent, he said. And I think it's a shame to let that go unnoticed. Her mind raced. This wasn't the first time someone had told her she was talented. She had heard the comments before, on breaks from work or after playing a song for a friend. But no one had ever said something like this with such conviction. No one had ever made her feel like her music could matter in a bigger way. Before she could say anything else, he held out his hand. I'm John, he introduced himself. I'm in the music industry and I work with artists. I think you've got something special here. I'd love to help you explore it. Maybe we can talk about how you can take this further. She blinked, confused. Help me, how? He shrugged slightly. I know people who can help with training, with connections. I'm sure you've got the skill, you just need the opportunity. He smiled again, this time with a touch of warmth that made her feel like he wasn't just another wealthy businessman trying to make a quick deal. He seemed genuinely interested, almost like he believed in her more than she believed in herself. Her heart raced as his words sank in. Help? Connections? She could barely afford her rent each month. How could she even dream of pursuing something as big as a career in music? It seemed too far out of reach. Too impossible. But then again, she had never imagined that something as small as playing piano for a few guests could lead to an offer like this. John must have noticed her hesitation. Don't worry about it now, he said gently. Think it over. But I'm telling you, if you've got the passion, I can help you get started. You could be performing in front of bigger audiences, making a name for yourself. You deserve that. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She had so many questions, so many doubts. Could she really do it? Could she really leave behind the stability of her job at the restaurant for something so uncertain? What if she failed? What if it was all just a dream? I know this is a lot to take in, John continued, his voice steady and calm. But sometimes the right opportunity comes when you least expect it. And I think tonight, that's exactly what's happened. He handed her a business card, one with his name and number printed neatly on it. Give me a call if you want to talk more. I'll be here for a little while, but I understand if you need some time to think. With that, he gave her a nod and returned to his table, leaving her standing by the piano, still in a daze. The room had returned to its usual hum of conversations, the quiet chatter of the guests as they continued their meal. But everything felt different now. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted in some subtle but important way. The music she had kept hidden for so long, the thing she had always loved, was now standing in front of her like a door to a different world, one she had never dared to open before. She stood there for a while, her fingers still resting lightly on the piano keys, the card in her hand feeling heavy as though it held more weight than just a name and number. Could this really be the chance she had always dreamed of? Could she step away from her comfortable life at the restaurant and chase a dream she had long given up on? The thought of leaving everything behind, the familiar faces, the steady paycheck, the life she knew, was both terrifying and thrilling at the same time. But the words John had said kept echoing in her mind. You deserve that. Could she? Did she? The night went on, but her mind was racing. She couldn't remember much of what happened after that. She went through the motions, taking orders, delivering drinks, smiling when needed, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Every time she walked past the piano, her heart skipped. She wanted to play again. She wanted to take that leap. But the fear of failure, the fear of disappointing everyone, still held her back. But as the night drew to a close and the last of the guests were leaving, something shifted inside her. She wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. And that was enough for now. The next few days felt like a blur. Emily kept the business card tucked carefully in her pocket, but she didn't know what to do with it. The moment she had shared with John at the piano seemed almost unreal, as if it had happened to someone else. Could it really be that simple? Could her life really change just because someone heard her play a song? She spent the next few shifts at the restaurant, going through the motions as usual, serving food, refilling glasses, and making small talk with customers. But every time she walked past the piano, she couldn't help but glance at it, as though it held the answers to questions she hadn't even been able to fully form yet. Her fingers itched to play again. The music was still there, waiting inside her. But the idea of stepping into a new world, one filled with uncertainty and pressure, made her stomach twist with anxiety. It wasn't just about the music anymore. It was about everything. The fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of leaving behind the life she knew for something she couldn't even picture clearly. She didn't know if she could handle that kind of change. Then there was the financial side of it. Her paycheck from the restaurant was predictable, steady, and covered everything she needed to live. She had bills to pay, rent to worry about, groceries to buy. Music wasn't a reliable income, at least not in her world. It felt like a fantasy, something for other people who had the privilege of taking risks, not someone like her. She had worked hard for everything she had, and the idea of throwing it all away for an uncertain dream felt irresponsible. But even as these thoughts swirled in her head, she couldn't ignore the pull of something deeper. The music called to her in a way she couldn't explain. When she was at the piano, everything else faded away. The world quieted. The rush of the restaurant, the pressure of her responsibilities, none of it mattered when she played. That moment of peace, of connection to something greater than herself, was enough to make her wonder if it was worth pursuing. Still, it wasn't easy. The self-doubt kept creeping in. She thought about John's offer. I could do this, she told herself, but there was a voice in the back of her head that kept saying, what if it doesn't work out? What if I fail? On the third day after meeting John, she couldn't stop thinking about the card in her pocket. She had come so close to calling him so many times. She could hear his voice in her mind telling her to take a chance. He had seen something in her that she had trouble seeing in herself. Maybe that was the thing that scared her the most, the thought that she could actually be good enough. What if she wasn't? It was around midday and the restaurant was quieter than usual. She found herself standing at the piano again during a break. The sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting soft rays of light across the keys. She ran her fingers lightly across the smooth surface, almost as if testing the waters. Her mind raced. Maybe just one song, she thought. One more time. She sat down, her fingers hovering over the keys. For a moment, she just listened to the sounds around her. The quiet clink of dishes being washed in the back, the muffled voices of a few early diners. The familiar hum of the restaurant, the one that had always been her world, seemed distant now. She closed her eyes and played a soft, familiar melody, a song she had played countless times before. It was one of her favorites, a simple piece that always brought her comfort. As the notes filled the air, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. She wasn't playing for anyone but herself. There was no audience here, no one judging her, just the music. When the song ended, she sat there for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. For the first time in days, she felt a small sense of peace settle over her, but as she opened her eyes, something caught her attention. A shadow had appeared at the door of the dining room. She hadn't heard anyone approach, but now she saw him standing there watching her. It was John. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to come back to the restaurant, let alone find her here, alone by the piano. He smiled when he saw her, the same warm smile from that night. "You've got a gift," he said simply, his voice calm and assured. "I can hear it in the way you play," she swallowed, feeling a sudden rush of nerves. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said, her voice a little shaky. John stepped closer but kept a respectful distance, as though he could sense the hesitation in her. "I had a feeling I'd find you here. You're holding back, aren't you?" he asked, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as though he could see right through her doubts. She looked down at the keys, feeling self-conscious. "I don't know if I can do it. What you're suggesting, it feels like too much. I'm not sure I'm ready to leave behind everything I know." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get it. It's a big decision. But sometimes you have to take a leap. The thing is, you don't need to have all the answers right away. You don't have to be sure about everything. But if you're not willing to take a chance, you'll never know what could have been." She let out a slow breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She had always played it safe. Maybe it was time to stop holding herself back. I've been thinking about it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But what if I'm not good enough? What if this is just a pipe dream? John's gaze never wavered. You've already got everything you need. You've got the talent. You've got the drive. And I can help you with the rest. But you have to make the decision for yourself. I can't do that for you. The silence stretched between them. Emily didn't know what to say. She didn't have an answer. All she knew was that the thought of leaving behind the piano, of letting her music fade back into the background of her life, felt harder now than ever. John's phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting the moment. He glanced down at it, then back at her. I have to go, but think about it. I'll be around, and I'm always happy to talk if you decide you want to move forward. He handed her the business card again, even though she still had the one from before. Call me when you're ready. No rush. And with that he turned and walked away, leaving her sitting there with the piano, the card in her hand, and a decision to make. As she watched him leave, something shifted inside her. The doubt, the fear, the uncertainty, they were still there, but now they didn't feel as strong. It was like a tiny flicker of hope had been lit inside her, and she wasn't ready to put it out just yet. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where music wasn't just a hobby, a future where she wasn't just a waitress but an artist. Maybe it was possible. Maybe it wasn't too late, but one thing was certain. She wasn't going to let fear hold her back forever. The days following her conversation with John felt like a whirlwind. Emily carried his business card around with her everywhere, but it wasn't until the weekend came that she finally found herself sitting in her small apartment, staring at the card for what felt like an eternity. She had never been one to take big risks, the kind of person who was content to keep her head down, work hard, and get by. But now, the thought of continuing to just get by felt suffocating. Her mind was still a battleground of doubts and excitement. Could she really make a living doing something she loved? What if she wasn't good enough? What if she tried and failed miserably? But then there was the other side of her, the part that couldn't shake the spark of possibility that John had ignited. The idea that maybe, just maybe, she could be more than just a waitress. She had never considered it before, but the music, the piano, it was still inside her. Maybe it was time to stop hiding it. It was late on Saturday evening when she finally made the call. She had put it off long enough. The phone rang a few times before John picked up. Hello? His voice was calm, warm, like he'd been expecting the call. Hi, it's Emily, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I've been thinking about what you said, and I think I'm ready. There was a brief silence on the other end before he spoke again, this time with a smile in his voice. I'm glad to hear that. I knew you would be. So what do you say we meet up and talk about the next steps? They agreed to meet the following week at a cafe near his office. Emily hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety wash over her. The decision was made. She was going to take the leap. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be instant, but it was a start. The next few days were filled with a strange kind of anticipation. Emily couldn't help but wonder what the future would look like. She thought about all the possible ways things could go. Success, failure, rejection, disappointment, but also maybe even triumph. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff looking out at the unknown. She wasn't sure if she would soar or fall, but she knew that staying where she was wasn't an option anymore. When the day of their meeting arrived, she dressed carefully. It wasn't an important meeting in the way that a job interview would be, but she still wanted to make a good impression. She wanted to show John that she was serious about this, that she wasn't just some dreamer hoping for a lucky break. She was determined to give it her all, no matter how terrifying it felt. The cafe was cozy and quiet, tucked away on a side street not far from where John worked. As soon as Emily walked in, she spotted him sitting at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him, but his attention was focused on the door. When he saw her, he smiled, stood up, and gestured to the empty chair across from him. Glad you could make it, he said as she sat down. His easy demeanor put her at ease, and she could tell from the way he spoke that he genuinely wanted to help her succeed. They started by talking about her background, about her years of playing the piano, and the moments when music had been the only thing that kept her grounded. Emily found herself opening up more than she expected, telling John about the dreams she'd kept hidden for so long, the music she had abandoned out of fear and practicality. I never thought I could do anything with it, she admitted. I've always just played for myself, you know. It was never something that could turn into a career. John listened intently, nodding. I get it. A lot of people think that way. But the truth is, most artists start out just like you. They have a passion, but they don't know where to begin. The important thing is that you've got the foundation. You've got the skill. Now it's about taking the next steps. He explained that he had connections with small venues around the city, places that were looking for new talent. He told her about music studios that could help her refine her skills and agents who could help her get gigs. Emily's mind spun with the possibilities. It felt like she was standing at the foot of a mountain, looking up at the summit but not knowing how to begin the climb. But John didn't pressure her. Instead, he laid out a plan step by step. They would start small. He would help her get a few local performances, maybe at open mics or private events. From there, they would build her reputation, and if the opportunity arose, they would push for bigger gigs. There's no rush, John reassured her. We'll take it one step at a time. The key is to stay consistent and keep improving. You don't have to be perfect, but you do need to commit to the process. His words were like a lifeline, something that grounded her in the moment and made everything feel possible. She wasn't expected to be an overnight success, and that was a relief. It was about building her career slowly, with patience and determination. After their meeting, Emily walked back to her apartment with a new sense of purpose. The weight of uncertainty that had been hanging over her felt lighter. She had taken the first step. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she felt more ready than ever to give it a shot. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where music wasn't just something she did on the side, but something she could pour her heart into full-time. The next week, she began practicing more seriously. She hadn't played like this in years. She spent hours each day at the piano, working on new pieces, improving her technique and learning new styles of music. It felt like everything was coming alive again. Her passion for the piano, her love for the music, all the things she had pushed aside in order to survive. Now she was carving out space for herself to truly live her dream, even if it was still just a small spark. John kept in touch, offering encouragement and checking in on her progress. He wasn't pushy, but he was there when she needed advice or just a word of support. He also helped her book her first gig, a private event at a small upscale venue. The pay wasn't much, but it was a start. Emily was both nervous and excited. It was the first time she would be performing in front of a crowd again, and though the stakes felt small, it was a huge moment for her. The night before the gig, Emily barely slept. She practiced late into the night, running through the set list again and again until her fingers were sore. She was terrified, but deep down she knew that this was it, the beginning of something new. The next evening she arrived at the venue early, her heart racing. The lights were dim, and the room was filled with elegant tables draped in white cloth, soft candles flickering on each one. The piano was positioned in the corner of the room, and when she saw it, a wave of nerves rushed over her. But as she walked toward it, something inside her steadied. This wasn't a big stage. It wasn't a concert hall, but it was a place where she could share her music, and that was enough. She sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and let her fingers rest on the keys. She wasn't sure where the night would take her, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The night of her first gig arrived, and Emily's nerves were on edge as she stepped into the upscale venue. The place was just as beautiful as she had imagined, with soft lighting casting a warm glow over the room. It was the kind of venue where everyone seemed to know each other, where the rich and powerful mingled in hushed voices, their laughter and clinking glasses creating an elegant hum in the air. Emily could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she walked past the guests, who didn't seem to notice her at all. She had been at this venue before, when she was just a waitress. She had seen the performers, the ones who filled the space with music that made the crowd fall silent, the ones who seemed so effortless and confident. But tonight, that was going to be her. She wasn't a waitress anymore. Tonight she was a performer, and that thought alone sent a rush of excitement through her. Her fingers were trembling slightly as she adjusted the piano bench. She took a deep breath, the air cool and quiet around her. John had promised her a small audience, a private event for a handful of guests. It wasn't a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but to her, it felt like the biggest moment of her life. It was her first step into the unknown. As the minutes passed, she could hear the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses behind her. She felt out of place, but she told herself to focus. She wasn't here to be anyone's servant anymore. She was here to share her music. When the signal came that the event was about to begin, she sat down at the piano and took another deep breath. Her fingers found their place on the keys, and for a moment everything else faded. The anxiety, the self-doubt, all of it disappeared. She was no longer a waitress. She was a musician. The first few notes were soft, but as she played, the music began to fill the room, weaving through the conversations and silencing the murmurs. She played with all her heart, each note a message to herself as much as it was to the guests. The music was her voice, her story, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of being heard. As the minutes passed, she found herself relaxing into the music. She let it take her, carry her to a place where nothing mattered except the song and the people she was sharing it with. Her fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, the melody flowing more freely than it had in years. The room was still, the guests captivated by the soft, beautiful notes filling the space. Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. It was as if she was exactly where she was meant to be. By the time the last note of her set echoed through the room, the applause was instant. At first it was just a few claps, but then the applause grew louder, more enthusiastic. Emily froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. This wasn't something she was used to. She wasn't used to being applauded, to being the center of attention. But it felt good. It felt like something had shifted, not just in the room, but in her as well. She stood up from the piano, her hands still slightly shaking. She gave a small, humble smile to the guests, unsure of what to say. But as she looked out at the crowd, she saw a few faces smiling back, a few nodding in appreciation. John was at the front of the room, clapping with the others, his face full of pride. She hadn't seen him much during the performance, but now he was walking toward her, a broad grin on his face. "You were amazing," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "That was exactly what I hoped for. You've got something special, Emily. I knew you would." She felt a wave of gratitude wash over her, a sense of disbelief that it had all come together. She had just played in front of a real audience, her first performance, and it hadn't been perfect, but it had been her. It had been enough. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. "I don't know if I've ever felt so alive." John chuckled. "You're just getting started. This is only the beginning." As the night wore on, more guests came up to compliment her, some offering kind words about the music, others asking how long she had been playing. She was overwhelmed but grateful. For the first time, she felt like she was truly being seen. Not as a waitress, not as someone just passing through life, but as an artist. She had worked hard for this moment, and she was proud of herself for taking the leap. After the event ended, John came up to her again, his smile still wide. "So what do you think? Ready for the next step?" Emily laughed, still catching her breath from the performance. "I can't believe it's over already. I feel like I could do it again, just like that. I never thought I'd feel so confident." "You've got the talent," he said with a wink. "You just needed the chance to show it. Now let's talk about the next opportunity." As they talked about what came next, a few more gigs lined up in the coming weeks. Potential contacts that could help her get noticed more widely. Emily realized just how far she had come in such a short amount of time. The shy, uncertain waitress who had been too afraid to step out of the shadows was now someone who could play with confidence, who was ready to take on whatever came next. The path wasn't clear yet. There would be challenges ahead, no doubt, but she felt different now. She felt ready. In the weeks that followed, Emily began performing more frequently. John continued to help her book small events and introduce her to other musicians and music industry contacts. Slowly, she built her reputation, and with each gig, her confidence grew. She knew she wasn't the finished product yet, but she could see the potential. She could see the possibility of a future where she was doing what she loved, where music wasn't just a dream, but a reality. And then one day, while playing at a local jazz bar, a producer from a record label happened to be in the audience. He had heard about her through a mutual contact and was impressed by her performance. Afterward, he approached her with an offer to record an album and tour regionally. It was the opportunity she had only dreamed of, and for a brief moment, She couldn't believe it was real. But there it was, the moment she had waited for. The moment that all her hard work and fear and doubt had led to. It wasn't an overnight success. It wasn't easy. But she had finally stepped into the life she had once thought was out of reach. And as she looked back on everything that had brought her here, from that night at the restaurant to her first gig, and now, the possibility of a full-fledged music career, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had taken the leap. She had trusted herself, and her life had changed forever.